Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Brenda Morrison, and I'm the Director of the Center for Restorative Justice at Fraser University. And it's a pleasure to be here today to present on safe and caring schools from a restorative justice perspective. I'm going to begin with a bigger lens. Restorative justice is an approach to safety and caring in schools, so it's really important to bring theory to practice and practice to theory. And so in the first webinar, I'm going to build the theoretical perspective that I use when I think about practicing restorative justice in schools. And I'm going to do that through the lens of justice, identity, and belonging. I think justice is central to our very lives. All human beings have a strong and innate sense of justice. And we know when an injustice has occurred, and it's felt and measured through a relational lens, more so than a legal lens. So justice is central to our very lives. And it's really important for us to rethink what it means to practice justice in schools, because we tend to think about justice as something that happens in a different institutional silo. And we need to bring justice back into our everyday lives, because our children and our teachers, our administrators and our parents feel justice and injustice every day of their lives. Related to this sense of justice in the theoretical lens that we're building today is a sense of identity. Identities are knowing who we are, where we belong, and who our people are. Social identities give us ontological security, knowing who we are and where we belong. And when we know that, we're less likely to hurt ourselves and each other. It's a different way of thinking about security than we normally do when we think of school safety. So knowing who we are and where we belong is really important to nurturing healthy social identities in the school across a range of identities. And identities are a psychological link between the individual and the social group. And we belong to many different social groups. And we have to navigate and dance through that as we orchestrate our own lives. And importantly, today I'm going to draw on some seminal work by Howard Zehr. He said justice is a journey to belonging. It's a journey to identity. And the journey to belonging and the journey to identity, are interlaced like a double helix. And so as we think about restorative justice as a journey to belonging, we can think about it as a journey to a sense of ontological security, knowing who we are and where we belong, both in terms of our individual lives and our group lives. So for Howard Zehr, that journey to belonging was characterized by 4 main threads or legs or elements. That belonging is characterized by meaning, and we're all sense-making individuals and communities, and we're always negotiating the meaning in our lives in terms of a number of different measures. The journey to belonging is also characterized by a journey to judgment. And our judgments indicate where we're turning left, where we're turning right, who's in and who's out. It's also a journey of honor and a journey of vindication. All those elements are really important to practicing restorative justice in schools, particularly when we characterize it as a journey to belonging. So I also want to think about power. How we think about power is central to understanding restorative justice. So we often think about power as our ability in terms of social control. And power is in our ability to exert our will as an individual, as an institution, as a nation state. And when we think about power as our ability to assert our will, that's when we can take away people's freedom. And we gnaw at that sense of belonging. And theories of social control were born of the age of reason. And they came out of really a fear-based culture. And they're powered by fear as well. We often step up with social control when we fear the repercussions of something happening or not happening. It's also driven by our instinct for retribution. We all have it. We all have an instinct for retribution. It's one way to vindicate ourselves and each other. And we need to harness that impulse and understand it. But we really have to recognize that it's there. It's, in some sense, the shadow of restorative justice. And when we ignore the shadow, it's going to just keep on rising up and presenting itself in different ways. And when we think about social control, our main lever for thinking about social control is the idea of punishment. And punishment is the intentional infliction of pain, by definition. And Howard Zehr characterizes that, particularly when it's interlaced with the idea of trauma, in terms of what he calls the 3 Ds. That when we keep on going down this mechanism of social control, again and again as our only and our predominant social lever in terms of maintaining safe and caring school communities, that eventually it will lead to disorder, disempowerment, and disconnection of ourselves and each other's. But we also have a different lever, and it's the lever that characterizes restorative justice, and that's the power of social engagement. And that one's leveraged by healthy social relationships. And Howard Zehr would characterize that in terms of 3 R's that are important to everybody's life: respect, responsibility, and relationship. And if we keep those 3 R's central to the practice of restorative justice, and actually the beat and the drum of school life, then we'll be further ahead than holding out the fear of punishment as an anecdote for bringing about compliant or healthy behavior. And fear is juxtaposed with love. When we think about what motivates us as an intrinsic mechanism that brings about different ranges of behavior, fear, of course, is a motivating mechanism, but so is love. And if we, but we're not used, it's not a word that we often use in the context of social institutions. But if we used it more, we could harness a lot more, because that instinct for love, or that the motivation of love is driven by the instinct for compassion. And that's innate to us as well. Ironically, we understand the instinct for fear and retribution much more than we understand the instinct for compassion. But that literature is really building now. We have great empirical literature that shows that the instinct for compassion is harnessed when we feel we belong. That we will act on our instinct for compassion when we feel we belong to a social group, or a school, or a community, or a classroom. And so that instinct for compassion is underneath and harnesses that the work that we can do in the field of restorative justice in the name of restoration. That we, each and every one of us, has the capacity to repair the harm done, to acknowledge the pain and move forward together, often sitting in the pain together, not pushing it away, but instead of inflicting pain for pain, as we do in retribution, how do we work with that pain and find another vehicle to manage it and harness it for the social good? And so, juxtaposed with Howard Zehr's 3 Ds, disorder, disempowerment, and disconnection, we want to, through the process of restorative justice, is create a social echo that has a positive ripple effect, that people can come out of the process and say there's a new way forward. And so the echo that we want out of a healthy restorative process is empowerment, connection, harmony, and a different type of order. The type of order that is bred from that idea of ontological security, opposed to physical security. There we go. So I want to juxtapose a little bit the ideas of from bullying to belonging, because we know a lot about bullying. In terms of social behaviors in school, we probably know more about bullying than any other social behavior other than the reading, writing, arithmetic of school life, which are also important. But bullying is really important to look at because it casts a wider social lens. And here in Canada, we don't have a very good track record. Our children tell us through a range of different surveys that we're not doing very well, that their peers are hurting them, whether it be online or face-to-face. And it relates to that idea of power and how we operationalize it as a society. So I've been looking at the ideas of restorative justice in juxtaposition with the ideas of bullying for a long time, because it is about power, it's about social relationships, and so we can learn a lot by thinking about addressing this problem of bullying in school through the lens of restorative justice. Because bullying is a systematic abuse of power, and that's the intentional infliction of pain, pain for pain. So often bullies in school are just mirroring back something that's unmet need in their life. So bullying hurts. Restorative justice aims to heal. And it not only hurts individuals, it hurts communities. There's that negative ripple effect that doesn't create a positive social echo. It creates a negative social echo where we keep on reproducing pain for pain. And I know that in another webinar, the recent work by Mark Lieberman highlights how social pain and physical pain are highlighted in the brain in exactly the same way. So that old adage that sticks and stones can break your bones, but names can never hurt you, is no longer valid. It's one of those adages that is proven false, and we have strong empirical brain evidence that shows that social pain is just as real as physical pain. So I want to think about that idea of bullying from a bully's point of view, because they're on a trajectory through social life. That bullying from their point of view is characterized by anger, violence, hyperactivity, externalizing problems, delinquency, criminality, but eventually, because they're not good at managing relationships in a healthy way, they befall depression and suicidal ideation. Likewise, victimization has a different trajectory. Victimization is associated with stress-related illness, school avoidance and disinterest, poor academic performance, increased fear and anxiety, emotional distress, and again, depression and suicidal ideation. Again, both groups don't have a way of managing healthy relationships. And both groups are feeling alienated in different ways, although their trajectories are different. Both need a community of care and better ways to manage relationships in healthy ways. So we've been studying bullying for a very long time, and what we do when we can't figure out what to do next from a research point of view is we throw all our best data and a big meta-analysis, and we said, what works? And so we throw all our best studies that have the strongest empirical evidence in a big data vat, and we said, what works? And so these are all interventions that have been shown to reduce bullying in some way. Everything from strong policies, to parent education, to teacher education, to class rules, to big school assemblies. We wanted to know what works. And this is what works. If we want to prevent bullying, what we found that the rules make a difference. Rules are important. School assemblies that really clearly articulate the norms and values of the school and engage the school as a whole. Classroom management is important, and so is a response. Parents and teachers need to respond. People have to be accountable for their actions. What works in terms of victimization? Well, a lot of them are the same. Everything that's in red shows up or everything that's in red with an asterisk means that it's important to both reducing victimization and bullying behavior. And, but what stands out in terms of reducing victimization is cooperative group work. That goes back to that sense of belonging. Peer engagement. We all need someone to play with, to learn with, to laugh with. So all of those things are important, and it's all about moving from a sense of isolation to a sense of engagement and belonging. In the meta-analysis, they made a number of recommendations, and what they highlighted in the end is that we need more theory that is related to the many theories that uphold the practice of restorative justice. And this is quite different than the many theories that uphold social control. There's good theories that are predictive and are important, but they're really theories of social control. And most theories of social control are rational actor models that separate our head from our heart. Restorative justice model theories are relational theories that engage us as whole people. And we need to find the balance between them. I'm also, I'm a Levinian. He's the grandfather of social psychology. There's nothing as practical as a good theory, and I have lots of theories that I could spin off for you. But the most important theory is the theory in your head. And so if you combine theory with practice, that means you're a good practitioner. And so I really advocate that you need to engage in the theory in your head. What is the normative theory of the world that you want to see? Is that theory grounded in retribution? Or is that theory grounded in compassion? Is that theory grounded in an eye for an eye? Or is that theory grounded in a path of healing, of belonging? What's the normative theory? What's the world you want to see? And that's the theory that you have to model for your students and the rest of the school community every day. Besides normative theory, there's explanatory theory. When I do X, I get Y. And you know, when I talk to so-and-so, they're going to give this back to me. Everyone's working in the ideas of explanatory theory every day. And the one that's really important is the one that you're playing with every day in your classroom, in the hallways, and that's the one you need to get in touch with. So for me, the practice of restorative justice is a respectful process of social engagement that nurtures social relationships, develops strong and healthy social identities, so I have a sense of belonging to a group, and strengthens my sense of place. I don't think we think enough about place when we think about restorative justice. Grounding in knowing who we are in terms of a place is very important. And our First Nations people here in Canada are teaching us a lot about that. So together that makes up praxis, bringing theory to practice and practice to theory. So here's all my famous theories. There you go. Lucky you. I'm not going to go through all of them. But I want you to know that they're all grounded in strong empirical evidence. And I want you to think about things that come up for you as you look at those names. And maybe they'll help you get in touch with the theory that you work with when you work with in school communities. So let's think about this idea of relationships. We know relationships are important to the field of restorative justice, but I often don't think we unpack them in all its nuances in different ways. So we can have relationships that are horizontal. So horizontal relationships are the ones that I relate to my peers on, one-to-one. Those are horizontal relationships. There's also my relationship with myself. That's my intrapersonal relationship. That's really important for me to understand myself, what makes me tick, what doesn't make me tick. And a lot of the work in social and emotional learning, there's a huge range of programs that show that sort of that level of self-regulation is really important to developing my relationship with myself, knowing when I'm going sideways or out the door and why I'm going out the door. And then we have the interpersonal relationships. Those are horizontal relationships. But the two relationships I really want to focus on in this webinar is that relationship with the group. That's that social identity. That's that real sense of belonging. And as I said before, social identities are your psychological link with the group. Groups are really important to social life. And we can gain that sense of belonging and a strong intra-group relationship in our classrooms, on our playgrounds, and in a range of different ways. And I'll go through that in the second seminar when I'm talking about the way that would look like in practice. But there's another relationship that's really important, and that's my relationship with the institution. So as the school as a whole, how do I fit in? Is there a strong sense of belonging for me at the school in terms of the norms and the values that are important here? The peer groups and the different status levels of the different peer groups, those are all really important. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about motivational postures, because motivational postures are about our relationship with the institution, with that large institutional group that defines what education is and how it plays out in the lives of our young people. And they're not fixed personality traits, but they're the dynamic interplay between the person and the regulatory body. And a school is a regulatory body. There's a lot of things that come top down in a school that says, you must know X, Y, and Z before you graduate. There are regulatory bodies that are going to tell us, they're going to set a range of behavioral standards through the Student Code of Conduct, but also a range of outcomes that we must meet. So I can either be committed to that institutional order or not. I can be capitulated within that institutional order or not. I can be resistant to that institutional order, and I can be totally disengaged. And I can move through that. So commitment is that I feel that I have a moral obligation to act with the interest of the collective as is handed down to me, and I comply as a virtuous citizen. Typically in that case, my needs are being met and the institutional needs are being met. There's a great fit between that. And that characterizes a certain population within the school. They usually are high achievers. And for whatever reason in their life, there's a good fit. Capitulation is I accept it as a regulatory authority, and I'm going to do my best. Because I want to be a good student. I want to be and sometimes it's going to work for me, and sometimes it's not going to work for me. Then we have a group of students that are resistors. They're going to be fighting that institutional order tooth and nail. And they're going to be defiant and argumentative because the institutional order has never worked for them. It could be for a range of different reasons, but that institutional order is not working for them. Or I could be totally disengaged. Institutional order means nothing for me at all, and I'm going to be defiant and escapist. So we often characterize this in terms of tightrope, or not a tightrope, high jump. And, because our job as institutions and as people who work in these institutions for really good reasons is that we keep on raising the bar. The bar's down here in kindergarten, and in grade 1 we raise it up a little bit more, and in grade 2, and we keep on feeding the students with what we think that they want and they need to get to that final step in grade 12. And so we keep raising the bar, and the committed group, we've given them everything they need, and they keep on clearing the bar. And they keep clearing the bar, and we keep raising it and clearing it again. Capitulation is we keep on raising the bar, and sometimes they knock it down, but they always try again because they want to be good citizens. Our kids really want to serve us well. They want to belong. They're highly motivated to belong. The resistant group, you go for the bar because the institutional order has never really served their needs. They haven't had that strong sense of identity, belonging, justice in the school. You go for the bar, and you're going to knock it down every single time. That's my job, is to knock down the bar, because there's this inversion in values and norms. If the school represents X, I represent Y, and I'm going to knock down your bar every single time. And actually, in terms of groups that I like working with, that's my favorite group to work with. The harder group to work with is the disengaged. The disengaged kids are walking out the back door. The school puts up the bar, and they're going out the back door because they don't even care about your bar anymore. They're the really hard ones to bring back in. So the resistant, at least the resistant ones, there's a lot of emotional energy you can work with. It is palatable in the air. So you're dodging it, but it's there, and you got to work with it. So here it is in terms of a visual. So commitment, there's a small amount, healthy. If you imagine at the very bottom of all those cones, those are little individuals. And the rounder circles at the top, those are the circles that represent the social institution and how the individual is identifying with that larger collective group. So, and there's you don't want them to be flat on top of each other. There's got to be a little bit of social distance between the individual and the group. And the green is there because it's positive affect. There's lots of positive mojo going on, and there's a healthy difference. So there's a committed relationship between the two. Capitulation is there's a little bit of negative residue around the outsides, but and there's a little bit more social distance between the individual and the group, but it's there in a healthy way. Resistance, that positive reference group within the larger institution is getting smaller positive reference group, and more negative affect, and the social distance is increasing. Disengagement, very small reference group within the social institution, and more social distance. So so those are all characterized as what I call vertical relationships. That's the individual with the social institution. From a restorative justice point of view, you see the little green circles? That's where you got to start working. That's where you work with those horizontal relationships. And you start with those small social relationships, and you keep growing them larger and larger and larger, hopefully moving the student back from the right-hand side to the left-hand side of the screen. So you're moving them back into, say, resistance and capitulation. So that's what you're aiming to do. The other interesting thing about this is that we often expect students to do all the changing. From my point of view, I always marry restorative justice with responsive regulation. From a responsive regulation point of view, there's an onus on the school sometimes, the institution, to change, to help bring that person back into, say, capitulation. It's never going to be perfect, but sometimes the onus is on the institution to change, as well as the individual to change. So restorative justice for me always goes hand in hand with responsive regulation. So it's not always top down, it can be bottom up as well. Okay. So if we bring this together, so we have these institutions of social control, because schools are regulatory bodies of social control. But if we think of restorative justice as being community-born and community-led, it's a process of social engagement. And how do we bring this together? Because we do need rules. Rules are important, but rules really work when they're matched with values. The values have to underline the rules, and the rules have to make sense in terms of the values. And part of our jobs as educators is to make sense of the two of those, and for our kids to understand that empty student code of conduct at the beginning of whatever program you get at the beginning of school really helps them make sense of their values, and their values to make sense of the rules. We also have to understand when it's important for some type of social exclusion, a time out, along with a process of restoration. Schools always have to make these hard choices of punishment or exclusion in restoration and inclusion. Durkheim said punishment is never for the individual. Punishment is for everybody else. It's a way of norm clarification that this behavior is not acceptable at our school. So punishment, from Durkheim's point of view at the very least, likely my own, is really not for the individual. It's to create a centering a particular behavior. We also have to look at very closely the relationship between third-party decision-making made by the administrators and the people at the top, and first-party decision-making. So restorative justice is characterized by first-party decision-making in terms of accountability and taking responsibility for the behavior. So when is it important for the administrators to be making decisions, and when is it important for those most affected? And we have to negotiate that. From mechanisms of social controls and the theories, we separate reason from emotion. Rational actor models separate reason from emotion. We focus on the facts, and we focus on order opposed to emotional regulation. From a restorative justice point of view, we find reason for emotion. We use that emotional energy of those resistors to harness a new way forward. That's the Kool-Aid, so to speak. And we think about power very differently, because often when things go wrong in a school, we focus on individuals opposed to groups. And so we have to think about how the power of individuals fits with the powers of groups, because restorative justice is often a group-based process. We sit in a circle, we create a sense of belonging, and that's also important. We have to learn how to ask different questions. So Howard's there. In terms of social institutional questions would be, what rule has been broken? Who did it? What do they deserve? So that's a very offender focus. That's how we hone in on the individual. So that's a very individualistic way of thinking about that, and that really upholds the power of the institution. The institution has the power to exert its will to determine what rule has been broken, who did it, what do they deserve. So think about that in terms of we put some of the ideas of values underneath those questions. Howard Zerr juxtaposes those questions of the social institution with community questions. Who has been harmed? What are their needs? And whose obligation is it to fulfill those needs? And that invites all of us to step up, opposed to having the institution step up every time. So the motivational levers are different, and I think they can come together in really beautiful ways that we can serve each other better. So if power is about social order, what about power of inviting human potential, the power of human potential? If we could all find the gifts within each and every one of us. So the power of human potential is something that comes from within, opposed to power being of social control, being an external force to exert your will. Institutions, particularly when the school institution was born, it was there to nurture the development of human capital, those traditional 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic. They're really central to the development and the mandates of schools, and of course they're really important. But they were central, and in some cases, particularly in the United States, they were suffocating. That's all schools were about, is reading, writing, arithmetic. Howard Zerr's 3 R's complements that. Howard Zerr's 3 R's are responsibility, relationship, and respect. And if we nurtured those 3 R's just as much as the other 3 R's, we'd be much further ahead. We wouldn't we would have much less alienation. There'd be much less push out of young people onto the streets and into our criminal justice system. So we've become very task-oriented in schools. How can we balance that with being relationship-oriented? As well as asking, what do you want to be when you grow up? We should be asking kids, who do they want to be when they grow up, in terms of the values and the norms that they'll bring as citizens into any walk in life. So for me, restorative justice is about putting the circle back in the square. The square is the institution. We have them, and they're an important development space for our young people. And I think they can be much stronger if we find ways to practice restorative justice through the ideas of a sense of justice in everyday life, a sense of belonging, and a sense of strong identity in our classrooms and in our playgrounds.